A very warm welcome to the author today, Mr. Shatrujeet Nath. It is a golden opportunity for me to introduce you, sir. Mr. Shatrujeet Nath is the creator of the runaway national bestseller series Vikramaditya Veergatha, a four-book mytho-fantasy which comprises the guardians of Hellhala, the conspiracy at Meru, the vengeance of Indra, and the wrath of Hellfires. Described as a new face to Indian mythology by DNA, Shatrujeet writes for movies and web shows as well. He is the author of the Karachi Deception, an Indo-Pak spy thriller. Shatrujeet's next project is an all-new mytho-fantasy series with an original story that is inspired by Hindu mythology. We are extremely honored and blessed to have you in here, sir.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And before I begin, I would also like to introduce you to our concept. What we are trying to do, we are basically running an e-magazine with the name of the Conflux Rivista, and school students are usually not given internships. Usually, college students are preferred, but we are trying to involve school students in journalism. We are making them do a live sessions. For example, work of local authors is not being promoted so much. People are not putting in so much money in marketing, but we are doing live sessions with authors so that they are able to promote their own work. And we're doing a lot of things as well. For example, we run a quarterly magazine. We are coming up with various issues in future as well. This is another way. This is another aspect to it. We'll be organizing a lot of festivals. We've done our workshop. We've done so many workshops, numerous workshops in the past. One of those was Hardik's LinkedIn workshop. Then we organized loads and loads of open mics. We are trying our best to involve the youth into whatever we are doing. So, sir, thank you for being a part of this thing, and we're really glad that you could join in today. Thank you so much, sir. And to start with,
No,
I
first of all, I think it's what you guys are doing out there with, trying to get youngsters involved in this entire process of essentially art and culture. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. It's important to get, it's so convenient when today people, when they talk about, what youngsters want to do, it's usually it's either you're chasing money or you're on social media. The fact that you're trying to get them to do something, giving them avenues to kind of either express themselves or even learn in the process. I think that's fantastic. So yeah, all power to you, and hope you go places with this.
thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot. And now I'd like to definitely begin the conversation with you. I hope that's all right, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to be sipping some warm water because I've just had a long conversation. So yeah.
Absolutely, sir. Please go forward. It is perfectly fine. So, as we start, I would definitely like to know that how did you start writing? Everyone has a story whenever they start writing. I have a story, and probably people who are sitting over here have a story. What is your story? And when someone is, writing their first book, they're coming up with their first book. They're trying to bring themselves out in it. So, did you also try to bring yourself out in it? I would definitely like to know about it.
Okay. Actually, my writing journey started by accident. It started by pure accident, and it started almost 25 years ago. So that's probably older than all of you out there. So, or at least most of you out there. So. I was in college, and the funny bit is that most people, a lot of authors, even when they were kids, they were probably writing and stuff like that. That never really happened to me. I never displayed any particular interest or talent in writing, and although my mom did try her level best to kind of get me in that space, she never really succeeded. So I think it was only when I got into college that I really started, exploring writing to some extent. But again, it was very, very, very patchy. It wasn't as if I was dedicated. I was focused in doing that. But yeah, it's just coincidence that I had a senior in college who saw my writing, and he kind of told me that I'm kind of good at this. So why don't I kind of pursue writing as a career? Of course, this was back in the early '90s, and um, and yeah, I did not at that time. The only careers that someone who wanted to write could pursue was either you got into journalism or you got into advertising. So that's how I got into advertising, and I was in advertising for about 3.5, 4 years as a copywriter. But I gave up advertising in probably the late '90s, and I got into journalism, and journalism is really where I learned my craft of writing. I learned the nuance of storytelling in journalism from, say, about '98 to 2009, so about 11, 12 years. And so I have been writing for a long time, whether it's in advertising or journalism. But in 2009, I quit journalism, and as Shashank Shukla just happened to mention, I took a big risk in my life. He said you should take a risk when you're young. I was 39 when I took that risk, so I definitely wasn't young. But I took the big risk of leaving a steady income, a fairly high profile job, uh, a very clear career path in journalism. I kind of left all of that and I decided to write fiction. And that's how I wrote my first book, which was the Karachi Deception. And then now, of course, I've got the four Vikramaditya books, and God willing, we'll have more as we go along. But so that's really what my journey was about. So it was writing that I got into it by accident, and then it kind of carried me and it brought me here today. So yeah, I'm thankful for that. To answer the second part of your question, did I kind of put myself in my book? I think all authors put themselves in their books. Mm, to whatever extent it might be, because ultimately every piece of creativity is a reflection of both who you are and what you have experienced, what you see around you, what your influences have been, people, thoughts, ideas, whatever it is. So yes, there is obviously a lot of me in my writing, as there's a lot of Nitish in Nitish's writing, or when Amish writes. So that's true about all authors. So yeah, there has been a lot of my beliefs, my value systems. Those things kind of reflect in my writing. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, sir. Coming to the other question, I have derived the question from your answer itself. There's a saying that there is nothing called as fiction. Authors, what do? They do is they change the name of the people and they change certain characteristics because they're afraid of people. So, what's your say on that?
I completely agree. In fact, that's what I keep saying, that fiction is actually telling the truth in the guise of a lie. That's really what it is. Because I mean, you walk into a bookstore and it says fiction, but there's a lot of truth actually on those shelves out there. Okay, whether it's again in the form of ideas, or it's in the form of narrative storytelling, or whatever it is, there is a lot of truth. There's obviously truth even. So, for example, a lot of what I write and a lot of what everyone writes. As I said, we bring our thoughts and our value systems into our writing, and and those are truths for us. So when I, as an author, write something, uh, and if I'm kind of imparting an idea that I believe in into my story, it's a truth for me. So obviously, the truth kind of reflects in my writing. Again, it's true for every author under the sun. So yes, there is a lot of truth, and again, as you said rightly, there are incidents that you take, there are people that you take, and you kind of sometimes either sugarcoat it, or sometimes what you do is you just kind of change the name of the person or whatever it is. But yes, there's a lot of truth in fiction. In fact, I keep trying to I tell the comparison I draw is that advertising tries to tell lies by trying to say that these are truths, and fiction is we try to tell truths by concealing it in a lie. So yeah, that's really what it is. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yes, sir. And I recall that interview that you gave with the front, and there you stated, I think we are still struggling to define what is Indian fantasy. Fantasy in India is getting equated with mythology, which is getting equated with history, which is all quite confusing to say the least. Unquote. If given a chance, what would be your definition of Indian fantasy, and how would you differentiate it from mythology and history?
Yes, I think it's a very valid question, and to be very honest with you, I still don't know what the answer is. I think it's the nature of the way we tell stories, and where we derive our stories from, our source material. Uh, okay, let me take a step back. Actually, if one were to look at Western fantasy, again, it's not very different. A lot of Western fantasy is essentially draws from Celtic folklore, Germanic folklore, Scandinavian folklore. So for example, now if one were to look at vampires or werewolves, all these essentially derive from Germanic folklore. Okay, or if you've got the orcs, which are there in, say, the Lord of the Rings. These are all ideas that essentially draw from folklore. So I think fantasy is a genre that is rooted in folklore and mythology. It's just that when we Indians, when we look at the writings of, say, George R.R. Martin or Tolkien or Lovecraft or whoever it is, we are not familiar with the European folklore, so we think that these are original ideas. They need not be. They could also be derivative of folklore from those regions. Talking about Indian fantasy, I think it's the same thing because for us, what is our most what is it that we mine for our fantastic ideas? We go back to our myths and our legends. So we go back to the Ramayana, we go back to the Puranas, we go back to the Mahabharata. That's where we derive our understanding. I think also what has happened is that our understanding, the way we tell fantasy based stories today, authors like me, Amish, Ashok Banker, all of us, what we do is that we kind of, probably ours is an amalgamation of Indian mythology and a little bit of what we have seen and read from Western fantasy. So we might take characteristics of or elements from Western fantasy and kind of integrate it into with Hindu mythology and put it forward. But I completely agree. I think we are still struggling to define what exactly is Indian fantasy because it's still very strongly rooted in mythology. Um, I really don't know whether we've still evolved and got to that point. There are people who are doing some interesting work, which is not necessarily mythology based. It's contemporary and stuff like that. My sense is that probably hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll probably have a more distinct Indian voice, and I think it probably won't be an Indian voice. It'll probably be a South Asian voice. It might come from Bangladesh. It might come from Sri Lanka. It might come from Pakistan or India, Nepal. I don't know where. I'm hoping that's really what will happen. I'm hoping.
Thank you so much, sir. You very well, set your focus on the question properly. I would, I really think that this is the most asked question to you, but I'll definitely like to ask this one as well. Why did you choose Vikramaditya as the lead and not some well-known god?
Yeah, I think this is a very. It's been asked before, yes, but I never thought of answering it because I love the idea of Vikramaditya. Okay, let me step back. I remember when I was a kid, I must have been probably about 7 or 8, and this I'm talking in the 1970s. Okay, so I remember my mom and dad. They bought me at that time. We used to have these Amar Chitra Katha comics. We still have them, but at that time they were very very big. So I think every alternate Sunday we used to go to a bookshop, and my dad used to buy me one comic. Okay, and I remember once one of the comics was it was actually Vikramaditya. That was the comic was about Vikramaditya, and I still vividly remember the cover, and it was a great piece of artwork. And I looked at the cover, and I was whoa, who's Vikramaditya? And I was so from that time I've been fascinated by Vikramaditya as a character. Of course, I must say that the Vikramaditya that was there in the comic was not my Vikramaditya. That was actually the Gupta king Chandragupta who assumed the title of Vikramaditya. So it was actually the story of Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty. But having said that, the idea of Vikramaditya I found very exciting. And then, of course, I also got exposed to the Vikram and Betal stories, which through Chanda Mama when I was a kid, Chanda Mama was what would kind of give you these serialized stories. And then, of course, once Doordarshan became big, we had Vikram and Betal and Doordarshan and all of that. So I've always been fascinated with Vikramaditya as a king because Vikramaditya is actually a legendary king. He's not necessarily historical. So I like the idea of Vikramaditya as a king who's extremely valorous. He's supposed to have had these nine gems or the Navratnas in his court, which includes Kalidasa, the poet. So I was very fascinated with Vikramaditya. And when I sat down to kind of say that okay, I want to tell the story of an Indian king, for me, Vikramaditya was a kind of a defining king. He stood for nobility, he stood for valor, he stood for honesty, he stood for all those values which that we treasure as human beings. So that's why I wanted to tell a story about Vikramaditya. And at that time, of course, it was very nebulous, very vague. I didn't have a story at that time, and this was probably in the early 2000s, when I was still kind of exploring the idea of fiction. But eventually, what happened was that when I decided that I'm going to sit and tell the story of the Halahala, I realized that Vikramaditya is the ideal hero because he's not a historical king. I also wanted to be clear that I did not want to tell the story of a god. I did not want to tell a story that was derived from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. I did not want Ram or Arjun or Krishna to be my heroes because people have already told those stories. They've told the Ramayana has been told many times before. The Mahabharata has been told many times. So we are familiar with these heroes. And as I said, there are other authors who have already told those stories and probably told them better. So I decided instead that I would tell an original story and I would use that opportunity to revive uh, interest in Vikramaditya as a king. I thought that would be exciting. So that's why I picked Vikramaditya, and I'm very happy I did so because I've had a lot of people. I had this very interesting conversation with a reader, and she told me something interesting. She said that Shatrujit, when most authors, Indian authors who write mythology, what they do is that they take a godlike character and try to make him human. I think that was important. So what this lady told me was that while other authors try to take a godlike character and try to humanize that person, what you have done, Shatrujit, is take a human character like Vikramaditya and give him almost a godlike persona or aura. So I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at what I've tried to do with Vikramaditya. So yeah, I'm very happy that I did that. Sorry, I've lost you. I have lost
Am
you.
I audible now, sir?
Yeah, now you are. Now you are. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, now you are.
Okay. So it's an entire sequel, and it's very difficult to keep the interest of the readers alive for years. It's been years since you have been completing this series. So how did you manage to keep that interest? That is the matter of that's the question of the millennium, I would say. How did you manage to keep the interest of the readers? What do you think that helped you the most? The plot, the characters, or the setting?
I think yes, that's always a challenge that when one sets out to write a series, how do you make sure that it's interesting enough for readers or viewers? And I also use viewers because today we're also used to Amazon and Netflix, where the idea of a series of a season based narrative is so compelling, and they do it so well, whether it's Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or whatever it is. I think that's really a big challenge when you set out to tell a story which is an arc across maybe 3 or 4 or 5 books. There's always the fear that what if I lose my reader by the second book? What if I lose my reader by the third book? That fear is always there, and that's really what compels you to kind of tell a story which is engaging and riveting, because that's the only thing that's going to get the reader to come back. So yes, I think the factors are very clear. It's You have to have a very compelling plot, obviously, because it's the plot that's there's this constant, okay, what is going to happen next in the story? How is the story going to resolve itself? How is this uh, how is this drama going to play out across the next book or the next season of the show, whatever it is? I think that's something that's very important. So plot, definitely, but also characters, because ultimately we as human beings relate to characters, because characters go through emotions, characters go through ups and downs, and once we start identifying with a character or a set of characters, we start rooting for them. We become a part of uh, their journey. We become a part of their cause, and once an author or a storyteller has achieved that, then it doesn't matter, because now you've hooked the reader. The reader wants to know what is going to happen to his or her favorite character or characters. So it's actually both. It's plot and characters. They both have to carry the story forward. But essentially, it's the author who has to carry all of them forward.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to know, do you follow a mechanical way of writing where you make a flowchart and decide this is going to be my start, this is going to be in the middle, and this is going to be in the climax, and this is going to be the conclusion? Or do you just let yourself explore the angles that you can put in the book? And the other part of the question is, if you let yourself explore yourself, how do you deal with not putting in certain distracting information about the characters. For example, too much information about the character often leads to the plot standing still. So, has it happened when you've written 30K words and the story is still over there, standing over there?
Yeah, I think these are very valid questions. The first part, let's first tackle the process of writing. And again, there is no one process of writing. I think every author has his or her own approach to the process. But what I do typically, and this is important because I write across books. So it's not like, so for example, my first book was a single volume. I mean, the whole story began and got over in one book. That's relatively easier because you've got a tight story. But Vikramaditya Veergatha, for example, I started writing the first book in 2013, and I wrote the last book in 2019. So obviously across 4 books, across 6 years, the story. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. So you've got to be a little more conscious of where you're going with this. Uh, I think what I do is I definitely plot to some extent because you must have some idea about where you're going with this story, especially because, as I said, if it's across 4 books, you must have how do I have those dramatic moments? Otherwise, as you rightly said, if I pack in all the fun in book one and book two is a dry, dead, it's just lying there in a puddle. So I've got to make sure that my drama extends from book one into two. There's enough happening in two that sustains interest. There's enough happening in three. So I definitely do a lot of plotting. I don't necessarily always have a very clear end in mind. I usually know how this is going to end. I don't necessarily know how exactly it's going to end in the sense that, every little minute detail. I never plot in every minute detail. I've got broad ideas. I kind of spread out the ideas across the books. And yes, and I also what I also do is I leave enough opportunity for me to explore new ideas because sometimes it's only as you write that a character appears and the character becomes interesting. So, for example, again, to take Vikramaditya, I love giving this example from Vikramaditya. One of the characters and an extremely loved character by readers. Readers completely love this character. Her name is Shanku. When I originally conceived Shanku was supposed to be a male character. I mean, he was supposed to be a guy. So Shanku he was supposed to be a 22-year-old young man. And it was clear, I'd always thought that Shanku would be, so it was supposed to be short for Shankar. But when I started writing, and as I sat down to write Shanku's scene, the first time we as readers see Shanku or meet Shanku, I just thought that, why not make this character a woman, a 22-year-old young woman? And it was a spur of the moment decision, and I really don't know why I did it, but I did it. And today, Shanku is one of the most interesting characters in the Vikramaditya series. She's young, she's spunky, she's an orphan, almost an orphan. I mean, and she doesn't come from a position of privilege, but she's such a powerful character. She's got a mind of her own. She's a warrior. She's someone that even Vikramaditya as the king respects. So it's a character that readers completely love. And it was, as I said, in 5 minutes, I decided to change the character from a man to a woman. And I think today I am so happy I did that because I've been able to create a female character that a lot of people, both male readers and female readers, they completely love. So I think we must definitely leave room for innovation, for new ideas, because that's also the fun of telling the story, right? If everything, as you said, I think the word you use is mechanical. If I plot everything, then the writing becomes mechanical, and there's no joy in that. Joy always comes when I am surprised. I say, "Oh wow, wait, this is fun." And if it's fun for me, it's going to be fun for the reader, right? If it's not fun for me, it's definitely not going to be fun for the reader. So I think that's very, very important. The second part of your question, I agree. It's very easy to now go down that path of self-discovery and say that, okay, let me go and now write more about this character. And I've done that with my first book. When I wrote the Karachi Deception, I obviously did lack the talent to tell a story the way I today have. Not only the talent, even the experience. I didn't have it. So I actually ended up writing a very bloated novel. It was very, very large. And while it had a good story, it took a long time telling. And the net result was that when I sent out the book and this was the manuscript, it was not the final book. When I sent it out to people to read it, everyone got back to me saying that, Shatrujit, it's a nice story, but there is just so much else that's happening that's slowing the story down. So what I did was, okay, this is interesting. Let me put this out there. My first draft for the Karachi Deception was 1,44,000 words long. And for a thriller, and my first book was a spy thriller, ideally it's between 75 to 85,000 words. So I've written probably about 70,000 words extra. So I actually, in my second draft, I cut 44,000 words and brought it down to 1 lakh. And that 1 lakh was what was eventually pitched to publishers. And of course, one publisher picked it up, and now finally it's about 8 to 9,000 words in length. But the truth is, yes, I had written a story which was self-indulgent. I just did whatever I wanted to do. But now I've got smarter, I've got wiser. I understand that there's a point. You can't test the reader's patience beyond a point. You must know when to kind of say, okay, enough with this. Let's get back to the story. And ultimately, I mean, if it's not helping the story, then it doesn't matter how personally fascinated you are with it. It has to go. What should remain in the book is what helps the story. If it's not helping the story, it needs to go. It's as simple as that.
Right, sir. And you were telling about you changed the character from a man to a woman. I would like to ask you about the start. Was it the same line always that you wrote? You're starting the beginning of the story. How do you decide the beginning of the story first of all? Is there a right way to begin? Mostly authors try to begin it in a chaos. Is it what you also usually prefer, or
Yeah, I think yeah, I think what happens is that the beginning is always a very fascinating place because you can actually begin anywhere. Okay, so for example, as I say, the challenge really is, and authors do this very often. You start somewhere and then you figure out that you've got it at the wrong place, and then you've got to go and fix it. So sometimes, yes. So let me go back to the Karachi Deception. That interestingly enough, for a book that had to be, cut 44,000 words needed to be cut to make it, kind of work for readers. Uh, no, the opening line remained the same from day one. So the opening line of the Karachi Deception, the opening scene and the opening line are the same opening scene and opening line which was there in the first draft. So that's interesting. But now, if one were to come to Vikramaditya Veergatha, what happens is that when I wrote the first book in the series, The Guardians of the Halahala, what happened was that I started telling the story from a particular point of view, which was essentially Vikramaditya's point of view, telling the story about Vikramaditya, his counselors, what's happening in Ujjaini, what's happening in the neighboring kingdoms, and all of that. But what happened was that when I reached probably about 15-20% into the writing, I realized that there was a problem with my starting, with my beginning. And the problem was that Vikramaditya Veergatha is a fantasy series, which means it needs elements of the fantastic. But what had happened was, because my story had started with Vikramaditya, it read like a historical. It didn't read like fantasy. Now my problem was that I couldn't bring fantasy in until the Devas and Asuras come into the story, because that's really where the fantasy starts. So what I did was I actually went back to my beginning and I did a prologue. So I did a prologue which actually looked at how the Halahal was found by the Devas and Asuras, and how the Halahal started destroying the universe, how the Devas and the Asuras took the Halahal to Shiva, and how he drank it and saved the universe from destruction. So what I did was I set that up in the beginning. Then I said many thousand years later, I started the story about Vikramaditya. Now what has happened is that for the reader already knows that this story is actually about the Halahal. It's about the Devas and the Asuras. They know that the Devas and the Asuras are going to come back. They know that Shiva is going to come back. They know that the Halahal is going to come back. Now what happens is, even when I tell about the story about Vikramaditya and his kingdoms and counselors and all of that, at the back of their head, they are aware that this is a fantasy. So this is how you have to know. You have to. So the whole idea is, how do you play with the story and the narrative in a way that engages the audience and doesn't confuse them. So talking of the beginning, you could begin the story really anywhere. It really doesn't matter. You could start in the middle and you could go back into the past and then come all the way back. You could very recently, I don't know how many of you have seen this. There was this beautiful show on HBO called Chernobyl. It was a kind of not really a documentary. It was a reimagining of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster that happened in the USSR. So what happened was that the whole story actually begins at the end. Okay, it begins. I won't tell you what happens, but it actually begins at the end. And then what happens is over the next 6 episodes, it tells you what happened to get to this point. So you can tell a story any way. It doesn't really matter. You can get it wrong the first time. That's okay. Never mind. You can get it wrong the second time. That's also okay. But eventually you have to get it right, because if you don't get if you don't get the beginning right, you've lost the reader. You've lost the audience, because that's really what hooks the reader in and says that, okay, I want to know more. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely, sir. You answered it very well, and there's no doubt about it. And if you talk about Karachi Deception, I'm pretty sure that you conducted a whole lot of research, because you've talked about Pakistan in that book, and you've never been to Pakistan. So, what sort of research did you, do for it? And secondly, I'm sure no matter how much research did you do, there were certain mistakes. You must have made certain mistakes because you don't know about that place, right? So, what do you think? Were the readers forgiving for that, or did they pinpoint things to you? Were there certain
So
bad comments, bad reviews?
no. So yeah, bad reviews, yes, that's different. We'll come to that. So actually, my research was, I'm always, and now I keep saying this, that today we are blessed because we live in the age of Google Baba. Okay, Google Baba is there, so he's made life so much easier for authors like who are writing today. I mean, imagine if I were an author in the 1970s trying to write the Karachi Deception. It would have been virtually impossible for me to do it, because I haven't been to Pakistan. I don't know any Pakistanis who can tell me, Karachi mein kahan hai, kya hai. I have no idea, right? So definitely, I mean, the internet really, really helped, obviously. What I did was, so okay, let me go back to the Karachi Deception and give you a little bit of context. The Karachi Deception is essentially the story of these three Indian commandos who are sent to Pakistan to assassinate an underworld Don, who's hiding in Pakistan and helping the Pakistanis, helping the ISI. So it's a typical spy thriller. It's loosely modeled on Dawood Ibrahim. The character's name is about. And I wanted the whole story to sound and read very authentic. So what I did was that I decided that I'm going to do a lot of research on Pakistan, so that when people read it, they believe that this is not, it should not read like fiction. People should get a sense that this is a declassified document by that has been that the government of India has declassified, and now we have access to it, and this is what really happened. Okay, so that's the kind of feel I wanted for the story. So what I did was I spent a lot of time researching the story on researching Pakistan on Google. I spent a lot of time on Google Maps. I spent a lot of time on Pakistani political websites, listening to people talking about politics, what's happening in Pakistan. I spent a lot of time on Picasa. The number of pictures that I have of Pakistan on my old hard disk is amazing, because I just wanted to know, what does Karachi look like? How do if I were to describe a place in Karachi, what would that place look like? I've never been there, as you rightly said. So that's really what I did. I spent a lot of time writing it. I got into minor details, like, for example, in a day, how many flights go from Sukur to Karachi? What is the flight that someone should catch from Sukur to Karachi to reach at so and so time? If someone were to travel by train from Rawalpindi to Karachi, how long is it going to take? All those kind of details. So very, very small, interesting details. And I think I'm very happy that I did that, because interestingly, the book has sold decent numbers in Pakistan as well. And I actually have quite a few readers from Pakistan who wrote into me. Most of them are from Karachi. There's one guy from Lahore, and there are three or four from Karachi. And I think all of them had to, the thing that they had to say was that it was fairly well researched. And most of them had to say that, one person said that there was a mistake that I made, and this is not exactly here, it's somewhere else. But he also said that, you're from India, so obviously you would not know. But the fact was that most of them were were quite impressed with the kind of effort I put into research Pakistan. So yeah, I think in that sense, research is obviously critical. I've never, as I said, I've never received negative feedback for Karachi Deception in terms of how I portrayed either Pakistan or Karachi. I seem to have got that absolutely right. There was a negative reaction is obviously, some people like the story, some people don't. That's natural. That's true about every book, every author. But yeah, in that sense, research is very critical. Definitely for a book like the Karachi Deception, and yeah, even for mythology. I mean, you really need to know your mythology to, even if you wanted, I keep saying that my mythology, my stories are only 10 to 15% mythology. The rest is all fiction and fantasy. But that 10 to 15% still needs to be solid. I can't just wing it and walk away. I need to have certain, my mythology needs grounding. So it's important that we know our source material. We know whatever we are. So research in that sense is obviously very important. Very important.
Right, and I would like to know that how many times did you edit the first draft of the Karachi Deception? Because it was your first book, it must have been very challenging, and editing is a very long process. So, how many times did you edit the draft? And have you ever tried writing the book from the conclusion and then coming towards the end? Sorry, coming
No.
towards the start.
To the beginning, yes. Okay. So to answer the first question on editing, different authors again have different approaches to editing. Some people, like for example, Ernest Hemingway, uh, is famous for this. What he used to do was he would just write everything that he had to say. He would just put it on paper. Okay. He would not filter. He would say whatever I feel, right, wrong, grammatically correct, logically flawed, doesn't matter. Okay, just put it down on paper, because the whole idea is to put everything that you've got in your mind in onto paper. Then what he would do is he would come back and he would edit. Okay, so he would scrap 50% of it, he would chop, change, all of that. Uh, so different authors have different processes. I am someone who likes, so if I write a scene, I like it to be at least about 70%, 60, 70% there to my satisfaction before I can move to the next scene. So in a way, my writing is I edit, I write, I edit, I write, I edit, I write, I edit. So I'm constantly in edit mode as well. So I don't need to do a lot of editing. Yes, Karachi Deception was obviously an exception because I had overwritten by a huge margin. But uh, apart from that, my process is, as I said, write, edit, or write, rewrite, write, rewrite, write, rewrite. That's my process. But Karachi Deception, yes, it took a lot of. It took, as I said, one round of. It took me 7 months to write the first draft, and then it took me another 2 months to bring it down from that 44,000 words to 1 lakh. Because obviously I couldn't just cut. I had to be judicious in my cutting and make cut it in such a way that I still didn't lose out the story, all of that. So yes, it's obviously a challenging process. I'm sorry, I missed the second part of your question. I forgot what that was. There was
Yes,
a
I
second
asked
part to it.
that, have you ever tried writing the conclusion first and then coming to the beginning?
Yeah, that's interesting because the funny bit is that the Karachi Deception, I was very clear how the story would begin, and I was very clear how it would end. What I did not know is how would I go from the beginning to the end. Okay, so in a way I knew what my conclusion was, and I was always working backwards. I knew this is how my story is going to end. I know how it's going to begin. So what I'm doing is I'm going from here, but I'm also moving back here. So that's how I'm trying to create the bridge, right? But in the case of Vikramaditya Veergatha, that was not the case. I had an ending in mind, but I was not. I actually had three endings in mind, and I really did not know which of these three endings I would pick. To be very honest with you, even after writing the third book, I've started writing the fourth book. I was still not clear which of these three endings I would pick, and as luck would have it, my ending is actually none of these three. It's a fourth ending, which just came to me while I was writing the fourth book, and I realized that yes, that is the perfect ending, and not these three which I've been kind of debating over the last 5 6 years. So in the case of Vikramaditya Veergatha, no, I didn't have an ending in mind. Uh, I didn't work backwards.
And did your hero something, come to this unsolvable position wherein, he was loaded with a lot of challenges and you were able to unsolve that situation for the hero? Because heroes are always known to be for the prime focus, that they can solve every issue. So, was there a situation when you weren't able to solve the issue of the hero?
Uh, so actually, what happens, and this is usually it's always a tricky bit. Uh, what writers do, and when I mean writers, it's for whether it's for movies or for television or books, whatever it is. The temptation is always to kind of load the dice against the hero. I mean that's natural. The stakes that your hero is faced against always keep rising. So the situation always gets worse and worse for the hero because the bigger the problems that he has to deal with, the greater his heroism. I mean that's just kind of intuitive, right? I mean, there's no point if my hero can solve a problem by the flick of his finger. He's not really much of a hero. Okay, I know Iron Man did that in the Avengers, but what I mean to say is that your hero needs to struggle to defeat whatever he's up against, whether it's a villain or it's a circumstance, whatever it is. So sometimes what happens is in our temptation to kind of make life miserable for our hero, we make it so miserable that our hero really struggles to come out of it because you have loaded the problem very strongly against him. So in that sense, yes, sometimes what happens is that I don't think it's really the hero's challenge. It becomes a challenge for the writer because the hero really doesn't do anything. It's the writer who who puts the hero into a sticky situation and takes the hero out of the sticky situation. It's just that the hero is doing it in the story, but it's ultimately the hero is a puppet, right? It's the writer who is pulling the strings. So, so yes, I mean there are times when this has happened, and you realize that you've probably overplayed your hand. So yeah, but I you really need to take care of. Again, I go back to that fundamentals of is it right for the story? Is it if it's right for the story, your hero will find a way out of it. You will find a way out of it. If it's not right for the story, you're probably overplayed at your hand and probably not a good idea. You should probably cut it out.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And what do you think is the perspective that the readers love reading? For example, an author can write from the first person perspective, the second person perspective, the third person perspective. What perspective do you think that the readers love reading the most?
I don't think so. I don't think there's one way of telling telling a story as this. I keep saying there are 1,000 ways of telling a story, and all 1,000 could work and all 1,000 could fail. But so, for example, you could have it. Again, depends on what's your motivation to tell the story. Why would you pick a first person? So, for example, when you pick a first person perspective, it makes the at one level it makes the character whose perspective you picked makes that person a little bit more personal to the reader because you go through that person's thoughts. Okay, when you're in third person perspective, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. But having said that, the freedom that a third person perspective gives is that you're able to get into the heads of multiple characters. Okay, so I I don't think readers particularly care about whose perspective the story is being told from. What they care about is that do I do I understand this character? Do I empathize with this character? And again, it's not about whether the character is good or bad. As I keep going back to it, you could, and it's been done before. You could take Duryodhan as your character, and you could make Duryodhan a sympathetic character because you just need to look at Duryodhan from his perspective. So the moment you put yourself in Duryodhan's shoes and you say that you are Duryodhan and you're walking with Panchali or with Draupadi, you're walking and you slip and fall into a pool of water and she laughs at you, you feel humiliated, right? You feel insulted. It's an accident. It's not that I made a fool of myself. I just slipped and fell, and here's this woman who laughs at me on my face. That's deeply humiliating for me. That's what angers Duryodhan and makes him do what he does. Does it justify what he does? No, it doesn't. But you understand why he does it. He doesn't do it because he's bad. He does it because he felt insulted by this woman who laughed at him. That's what it is. So when you take any character and you create empathy, readers like that. Readers love gray characters. Readers love, one of the reasons why people love Game of Thrones so much is because every character is grey. There's no white character. They're all grey characters. And people love grey characters because all of us are human, right? All of us have, there's something good in me and there's something bad in me. And we all acknowledge that to ourselves, maybe not in the world. So I think that's what is important. The perspective is not so important. It's about who the character is and how well you've been able to expose the vulnerabilities of that character, so you understand the character and you feel for the character. That's really what's important.
Thank you so much, sir. Is there any mantra that you would, like to give to the budding writers over here? Because we have a lot of people who are starting to write. So, is there anything that you would like to give? And then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Sure. Okay. I think for me, what's really important, and this is important irrespective of whether you're writing for movies, for books, or whatever it is. We must understand that the writing process is an extremely lonely process. Okay. Nobody really understands, like even if you're sitting on your laptop or your computer or whatever it is, you're sitting and typing, and somebody looks over your shoulder, that person has no idea what you're doing because that person reads maybe a paragraph and that paragraph doesn't make any sense. Okay, because obviously that paragraph needs context. So nobody really knows what you're doing. Nobody really probably even cares what you're doing. Okay, apart from your very dear friends and family, probably. It's lonely. It's a long process. Okay, I'm not saying it's not fun. There's a lot of fun in it, but it's lonely and long, and the rewards seem very very far away. Okay, so I keep going back to this. The analogy I love using is that writing is like going on a pilgrimage. You're doing it for yourself. Okay, it's long, it's hard. Okay, but you're doing it for yourself, and what you get at the end is a blessing, right? And the book is the blessing. What you have written is actually the blessing. So the pilgrimage of writing results in a blessing, which is the book. So just stick at it, look at it as a pilgrimage for yourself. It's self-discovery, it's introspection. It's also fun. Yes, it's a lot of fun. But just remember, stick at it, and yeah, you'll get something good at the end of it.
Right. At the end of the day, it's all about the hard work we put in. And you talked about loneliness. So I don't think that the process is lonely because the pen and paper acts like a best friend, which is always there by your side.
It is. It is. I must say yes. But when I mean lonely, what happens is that not many people around you. So how is this different from a painter? Okay. So for example, when a painter is painting, you can see the painting develop in front of your eyes. Six people who are standing behind the painter can see what's going to come. Somebody who's sitting behind the author has no idea. Until you read the full book, you have no idea what this is about. That's why it's lonely. So people don't get what you're doing. They don't. There's no way of looking back and saying, is this good? Because they've got to spend 1 week to read it to tell you whether it's good or not. That's why it's lonely. It's a very internal process. It's fun. It's completely fun, and I love doing it. And I think all authors love doing it. So yeah, it's not lonely as long as you're having fun.
Right. And do you see yourself writing non-fiction books in the future?
No, I don't think so. I'm saying this today as of whatever 5th November, or sorry, 5th December. I don't know. I mean, 6 months later, I might change my opinion, but I don't think I would want to write nonfiction because I think I've done enough of that in my journalism days. I did have an opportunity to kind of write nonfiction. I did get a couple of projects that came my way, but I was not really interested in doing that. I think there's more fun telling fiction because that's how as I say, you conceal the truth in the lies, and that's why.
Right. And you can escape the reality. You can spend your time in your own world in writing fiction, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's good fun. It's great fun. I won't overrule nonfiction, but then again, it has to be something that matters to me personally. I would not write nonfiction just for the sake of writing it. It has to be something that means something to me personally, and I think all nonfiction writers, when they write nonfiction, I think most of them feel for whatever they're writing, whether it's a person or an event or a period in history or whatever it is. So yeah, I think so.
Right. So, and now we have a question from the audience.
Mhm.
The first question that we've received is from Aditya. He has asked, would you mind focusing about Vedal and the border world?
Would I mind? Okay, this is just a quick context to those of you who haven't read read the Vikramaditya series. As I said, Vikramaditya, there cannot be a Vikramaditya without having Betal or Betal, as the Vikram and Betal stories. So when I conceived the Vikramaditya universe, I knew that Betal would be a critical character. But what really happened was that now what if one goes back to the legend of Vikramaditya, what happens is that Vikramaditya is supposed to walk to a cemetery or a smashan, whatever they call it, and Vetal is supposed to be living on a tree, and he takes the Vetal down and puts him on his shoulder and brings him to, he's taking him somewhere, and that's when Vetal tells the story. You know what that story is all about. When I said that, okay, I'm going to use Vetal in my story, I found it kind of absurd or bizarre that Vetal will be living on a tree, and my hero will go and pull him down from a tree. I somehow didn't make sense to me. Okay, I also wanted to give Vetal a slightly different spin. So what I did was I said that, okay, if Vetal lives in a cemetery or in a smashan ghat, what if I create in mine, because mine is a fantasy world. What if I create a different realm or universe? Okay, not universe, a different realm. So what we say in our stories is, there are there are three loks. There's Patal Lok, there is that Prithvi Lok, and there is Dev Lok. So there are the three loks. But I said that, okay, what if I create a fourth kind of world or realm, which I call border world. Now, what exactly is border world? Border world is a world between two worlds, and what you do is that, and if Betal is a goal or a ghost, what border world does is a smashan is in a way like a border world. It's the world between the living and the world of the dead, right? It's the border world. So I actually created a thing called the border world, and the border world is actually the future of everything. Once everything dies, before things die, they pass through border world. So border world. So when you go into border world, when Vikramaditya goes into border world, in border world, his palace is a crumbling ruin because it's the past of everything or it's the future of everything. Okay. So border world is a fascinating place where Betal lives. And so it kind of became metaphorical of the smashan, but it became so much bigger than the smashan because border world is also integral to my story because that's where Betal lives, and Betal and Vikramaditya are obviously friends, and Vikramaditya goes and seeks a favor from Betal, and I don't want to reveal much. There is, because I don't want to give out spoilers, but but border world plays a very critical role in the story. So that's really my idea of taking the idea of a smashan ghat and kind of saying, okay, how do I make this into a world as opposed to a just a physical graveyard? So that was the whole idea.
Right, and so this is a little out of the context question that we have received, but I feel that this is important. So, what do you think is the future
Mhm.
of the publishing industry in India, specifically if you talk about the post-COVID era? Print media is being dissolved right now. Do you think that your next book, whatever the next book would be post this fourth book, do you think that it will be published in paperback because the youth is running after technology and people are more focused towards ebooks? So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is important. I don't think the post-COVID situation is directly connected to paperbacks per se. I think what's definitely going to happen is that the way people purchase books is definitely going to change because obviously you there aren't enough people who are walking into bookstores, and that's a reality. Having said that, uh, the transition from reading books to moving into an electronic format of reading is calls for a habit change, and not everyone likes to do it. Not everyone wants to do it. Some people do it effortlessly. Some people, they need to be, you know, taken across the line, kicking and screaming. But and I don't think there's even a need for that. I think the two things can kind of coexist because at the end of the day, what's a Kindle or what's a paperback book? They are two delivery mechanisms. Okay, they are not the end in itself. What is the end in itself? What is the end? Is the story in them? Okay, so what happens is that you will have people who will continue reading books because some people love the feel of a book, they love the smell of a book, they love turning pages. I know people are completely fascinated by that. I know another set of people who are very happy reading on the Kindle, who would probably never buy a physical copy of a book ever in their lives. Uh, I think both of these exist. I personally still buy books. I also read on the Kindle. So I'm a bit of both. Okay. So I think what's really going to change, it's probably going to take a lot longer, but we are definitely, it doesn't mean that we're going to see the end of paperbacks. Definitely doesn't mean that, the publishing industry will have to go through a fundamental paradigm shift. They will have to shift eventually, yes, but it's not going to happen. So COVID is not going to hasten the process. COVID is going to make the way people buy books change. We'll probably see a lot more of shopping on Amazon, Flipkart. That's really where people will be buying books. What I fear for is the bookstore. Bookstores have already been under pressure, mainly because of the likes of Amazon and stuff like that. Bookstores have been under pressure. Single small outlets have been under pressure. Now with people not going back to bookstores, I feel a little bad for bookstores because they might not be able to sustain the smaller ones. So I do wish they did sustain. I do wish that readers went and bought books from bookstores, because I think one of the most important things about a bookstore is that people discover new authors in bookstores. When you go to shop online on Amazon, you've already kind of decided what you're going to buy. You might not have frozen on the author, but you've said, I want to buy a romance, or I want to buy a thriller. Okay. And by and large, you would go and look for a thriller or romance. But in a bookstore, you can browse around the bookstore. You might have gone into the bookstore to buy romance, and you're walking, and then suddenly, you're in front of crime, and you pick up a book and it looks interesting, and you end up buying crime. Okay. And probably it's an author you've never heard of, but it's so much easier to discover new genres, authors in bookstores, and so much more difficult online. So for that one stake, I hope bookstores stay alive.
Right, and coming to the last question for the session, sir. I've heard your interviews before, and you've said that everything sticks with the author and experiences, inspirations. If everything sticks, all that happens to you. But I would like to ask you, who are those two people you would like to dedicate your success to?
Who are the two people I would like to? I think I don't know if it's people, okay, because uh, I think, okay, let me look at it this way. If I went back, there would be three people I would like to expand that universe to three people. I think it would definitely be my parents and my wife, because my parents always let me do what I wanted to do. They always gave me the freedom to chase whatever I wanted to chase. Okay, so at no point in time when I was growing up was I ever told, this is what you should do. No, if you think that this is what you should do, go and do it. Okay, uh, it was not complete freedom. It was freedom with me understanding the responsibility of having made that choice. So I think that was very important. So they gave me as I keep saying, the what parents really ought to do is give their children the wings of independence and the roots of responsibility. So that's independence is what lets you fly, but responsibility is what keeps you grounded. So I think that's something that my parents probably did to me. So for that, I'm thankful, and that's shaped me into who I am today. And I'd like to thank my wife, obviously, because I mean, without her, I would never have made this transition from being a journalist to being a fiction an author of fiction. So she really backed me in this. She gave me the faith and the confidence and the freedom, as I said, again, she could have said, no, don't do it. You've got a good job, you've got a great job, you're settled in life. Why do you want to rock the boat? She didn't. She said that, okay, if it's your dream, you want to chase it. I'm here for you. So I think that's important. We need people in our lives who believe in us. We need people who can, prop us up when we are in need of help, support, emotional support, all of that. So yeah, definitely all these people, and I think everyone who's been kind to me, good to me, who's meant me well. I think it's thanks to all of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for being here with us today. With this, we come to the end of this particular session. And we really hope that you get this book turned into a movie. We would love to see a movie of the Vikramaditya series, and I'm sure that everyone sitting out there would love to see the movie, love to watch the movie. So please, please, please do something about it.
What I would do is I would request all those sitting out there to first read the book. I mean, please do read the book because while it's great to have it as a movie or a TV show and stuff like that, it's also a book. So if you really if you love reading and if reading is something that comes to you naturally, do give it a shot. I think it's something that you would enjoy. I've had a lot of fun writing it. I've had readers who have had a lot of fun reading it. So I do hope all of you read it, like it, and and yeah, God bless all of you. Um, Thank you, Paki, and thank you the whole team out there for
Thank
having
you,
me
sir.
over.
Thank you, sir. We are really obliged to have you with us today. It was a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.